Welcome to the AWIP podcast. I'm your host, Rae Smith. Here we focus on investigations and all things animal welfare related. We're going to be talking with professionals around the globe every week, so make sure that you find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Spotify. And if you're interested in finding out more about AWIP and our mission, make sure that you check us out at either of our websites, awip.org.uk or at awipusa.org. We've got a whole jam-packed episode with tons of information for today, and I'm very, very excited to bring on two guests who are going to talk with me about euthanasia, spay neuter, the vet shortage. So I will keep the introductions brief because these two have been in animal welfare for a very, very long time, and I could probably go on for a whole 10 minutes introducing them. First, we have the executive director at Pet Friendly Services of Indiana and a board member of the United Spay Alliance. She's also the chair of the Vet Shortage Task Force for the United Spay Alliance, Cheri Storms. Thanks, Cheri, for coming on.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, Rae.
And for our other guest, he is sometimes referred to as the father of shelter medicine. He's a board-certified veterinary surgeon and has served as a professor for many decades at Missouri State University College of Veterinary Medicine, and he holds the Marsha Lane Endowed Chair of Humane Ethics and Animal Welfare. He has been an author for the Guidelines for Standards of Care in Animal Shelters. He sat on several different boards, countless awards. May I bring on my second guest, Dr. Phil Bushby. Hi, Dr. Bushby. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to be here.
That was a very long-winded intro. You guys have so many, accomplishments and such. It's hard to get through it fast. So I want to jump in right off the bat here talking about the history of euthanasia and the effect that spay-neuter initiatives has had on euthanasia numbers over the past several decades. So I kind of want to, I was not around, maybe our viewers have noticed, I was not around in the 70s, but I think maybe we should rewind a little bit back to then. And if you two can kind of walk me through what did things look like back then and how did spay neuter affect euthanasia throughout the next several decades?
Who wants to go first?
Well, I'm not going to go back to the 70s, but looking at 1990 to 2010, back prior to 1990, there were some 12 million cats and dogs euthanized across the nation annually. And then in the 1990s, low-cost spay neuter clinics started opening. There was a movement born to turn off the faucet of overpopulation so that we could manage the animals that we do have, get them nice homes, and do the right things for animals. And from 1990 to 2010, the numbers dropped 80%. So instead of 12 million animals euthanized, it became closer to 3 million. And, before the pandemic, things were looking really great. Shelters and rescues were fighting over small and medium dogs to get adopted out. All we had left were large dogs, and that was going to be our next area of spay neuter focus, to dry up that population, bring it in line with supply and demand. But now, with the pandemic and the vet shortage, we are seeing shelters full of every kind of dog, pure breeds, mixed breeds, doodles, every kind. So we know from history that spay neuter works. We know it's the only humane way to reduce overpopulation, and it's a fraction of the cost of sheltering and adopting out an animal. So it's just a total win-win to save lives and money.
So, and I will back up to the 70s.
Okay.
Because the estimates of the number of animals that were euthanized in animal shelters in the United States in the 70s were close to 24 million dogs and cats per year. I mean, that's a number, hard to wrap your head around when you consider that there's, like 80 million pet dogs in the country now and 80 million pet cats in the country, but we were killing 25 million a year back in the 70s. I agree that the introduction of high-volume spay-neuter clinics played a huge role. But I'll say one other thing played a role that also happened right around early 90s, and that was a veterinarian by the last name of Lieberman, who actually published an article in the AVMA journal promoting pediatric spay-neuter. spay and neuter them before they can ever have a single litter. Spay, neuter them before the females ever come into heat. And that was revolutionary, and people fought that. But then again, so were the high volume spay neuter clinics were revolutionary, and people fought that. But so if you take the clock from, say, 1974 to 2024, which is 50 years, you've gone from 24 or 25 million animals per year to now the estimate is less than a million. COVID is probably, there's been a spike. It's gone up because of COVID. And the estimate is that there were probably 2 million animals that would have been spayed or neutered that weren't spayed or neutered because everything shut down for months. Human hospitals weren't doing elective surgery during the pandemic.
Yeah.
High volume spay neuter clinics closed their doors during the pandemic. And so all the animals that would have been sterilized during that 18-month to 2-year period weren't. Guess what they did? They produced puppies and kittens, and we still haven't recovered from it. But the public is much more educated about the need for spay neuter. The public is much more sensitive about the fact that they've heard the horror stories about the numbers of animals euthanized in shelters. And so a change in attitude, a change in many areas accepting pediatric spay neuter, and the advent of the high volume spay neuter clinics have dropped the euthanasia rates precipitously.
Why was there so much pushback for early development age spay neuter at that time?
All right, I'm going to start in the 70s again. I remember the anesthetic drugs we had in the 70s. They were not safe for 6-week-old, 8-week-old, 10, 12-week-old puppies and kittens. And so the majority, as we got to the 90s, the majority of veterinarians that were practicing in the late 80s and early 90s were educated in the 60s and 70s when even the thought of pediatric spay neuter was absolutely taboo because we didn't have safe anesthetic protocols. So they weren't used to it. They had never done it. They were afraid of it. And then we realized, wait a minute, the anesthetic drugs we had in the 90s, and certainly the anesthetic drugs we have in the 2020s, are perfectly safe in puppies and kittens as young as 6 weeks of age. And so that concept, if you can imagine, if you couldn't do, I've thrown out, a lot of people refer to the concept as early age spay neuter. And I've thrown that out because what I talk about is delayed spay neuter. Everybody delayed spay neuter until 6 months of age or older, and while kittens were getting pregnant at 5 months. Yeah. And small breed dogs were getting pregnant at 5 months and 6 months of age, but they delayed spay neuter until that age.
And the United Spay Alliance pushes this 6 by 5
absolutely.
program.
Absolutely.
So where did the 5 months come up with this? Because it's my understanding this is not an arbitrary number, and it's actually backed up by the data.
Yeah, the 5 months, I think there's two factors. One is kittens and small breed dogs can come in, female kittens and female small breed dogs can come into heat as early as 5 months. So you want to get it done before their first heat cycle. Incidence of mammary neoplasia in both dogs and cats skyrockets if they've had one heat cycle. So you want to get it done before that heat cycle. But if it's a privately owned pet, you want it to have its full vaccination series before you admit it to a hospital. From the standpoint of where you might catch an infectious disease, which is more likely, in the home or in a veterinary clinic, where there's animals. So you don't want to admit the 6 and 8 and 10-week-old puppy into the hospital itself until they've been fully vaccinated. Where the difference is, which is the more dangerous environment for an animal, for a puppy or kitten, 6 to 8 week old puppy or kitten, the home or an animal shelter, well, obviously the animal shelter. So you back up spay neuter for those puppies and kittens to the earliest possible age, which most people say is 6 weeks. Some people say earlier, but I haven't gone that far yet. You spay and neuter them at 6 to 8 weeks of age. You get them out of the animal shelter to then get their full vaccination series. The last thing you would do is leave them in an animal shelter where they're exposed every day, potentially to infectious disease, just to get them vaccines into them. No, get them home, let them have, get them spayed and neutered. They're going to be much more adoptable, and then they can go through the vaccination series. So the logic of the 5 months is for that owned animal. You've completed the vaccination series, but you get them before they're sexually intact.
And in Indiana, we did a survey of our vets a few years ago, and a lot of them spay neuter at 4 months, and a lot of them wait until 6. So 5 is a nice midline.
And the sad thing is the difference between 4 months and 6 months is huge from the standpoint of the potential health risk of that animal for the rest of its life.
What is it? We'll go into that, Dr. Bushby.
Well, the biggest one is mammary neoplasia. Mammary neoplasia in cats, it's the third most common neoplasia in cats. It's almost 90% malignant. The average life expectancy of a female cat diagnosed with mammary neoplasia with or without treatment is less than a year. All right? And the incidence of mammary neoplasia, if they're spayed before they ever have their first heat cycle, is close to 0. All right. It's not quite as dramatic in dogs, but it's the same situation in dogs.
So we're really kind of grazing here on the cost effectiveness of spay neuter and engaging the community and what that type of effect has on shelters and in turn our animals, our community. I want to hear from you, like both of your experiences about the cost effectiveness of spay neuter and how you see that affecting not just, I'm not talking just about the animals who've been spay neuters, but the communities and the shelters that you work with. What does that look like?
So going back to strong demand for spay neuter, that's what we have in Indiana. So we work with one of the clinics. It's a mobile clinic, and they fix 100 cats per day. And when they roll into a community, the cost is $100 to get your pet fixed. So we give the mobile clinic a budget in case people can't afford it. We find that more than half of the people don't even ask for a discount. They want to get their pets fixed, and they can afford to do it. They just need access to affordable care. Most clinics sell out, so there's really strong demand for spay neuter. And on the days when 100 cats are fixed, if 50 of those are female, that's 50 females that will be producing litters to go into rescues, community cat programs, or shelters. So it's a real win-win. And we've seen studies too about the cost effectiveness of spay neuter. So this is $100 surgery at the community level. If we give discounts and they equal $50 per person, versus intake into a shelter and rehoming a pet, it's at least 3 times as much money, if not 6 to 8 times as much money.
Cheri, is this the work that you're doing with Pet Friendly Services of Indiana?
It is. Okay. Yeah, we're a financial assistance program that we run.
Okay. Oh, I want to clarify for people who are watching if they're interested and want to find that stuff out. So, so that I'm clear about it. Okay. Transitioning a little bit into our next, and I think probably our main topic here, which is the veterinary shortage. And we're hearing this all over. Everybody's flipping out about the vet shortage, right? So I want to talk a bit about that. How did we end up here, and in your personal positions on what the state of our veterinary crisis is right now?
There's so many aspects to it.
I know it's broad.
Part of the veterinary shortage is geographic. as the cost of veterinary education has skyrocketed over the decades and student debt has skyrocketed, what you find is students at graduation, even kids that grew up in small town rural America and came to veterinary school to go back into rural America in a mixed animal practice to serve the people they grew up with, find that it's economically not feasible, that they can't service their debt and make a decent living. And so they migrate to the suburbs uh, and end up, so many of them, into small animal practices because they can make more money there. But that leaves whole areas, counties or larger areas, without veterinary services at all. So obviously, those animals aren't being spayed and neutered. Another element of it is the greater attention by the profession, which I think is a healthy attention, to work-life balance. We were talking before the podcast started of the first veterinarian that I ever worked for. It was a summer job between my freshman and sophomore year of veterinary school, where the driveway to his house and the driveway to the practice was the same driveway. And if someone showed up at 10 o'clock at night at the practice and no one was in the practice, they walked across the driveway and rang the front door bell to the home. And I can remember the conversation with that veterinarian saying, I would never want to live that way. I would not want to be on call 24/7, 52 weeks of the year. And he told me then I had picked the wrong profession. There's been a change in mindset that people want to have that work-life balance, right? And so if veterinarians were working 60 hours a week in the 70s and now they're working 40 hours a week, it would take 1.5 veterinarians just to do what that one person did. So you have a geographic component, you have a work-life balance component, stepping into it, and shoot me if I go too far, but a young lady graduates from veterinary school, goes into a private practice, and 3 years later wants to start a family. She's going to ask for time off. The guy isn't. All right.
That's because he has limited skills.
Yeah. That's very limited skills in producing, in producing a baby. She may actually want to not practice until the kids go to school. And then she may want to practice part-time, so she's home when the kids get home from school. All of that is good and all of that's healthy, and all of that makes the shortage of access to veterinarians worse.
Right. And as I like to say, we need an actuary to figure out how much time vets are going to work and all these complicated little mathematic things that we know, and just and start giving us some numbers to see where we need to be based on all those factors you covered, Dr. Bushby.
And that's exactly what we need, and it shouldn't be emotional response. And what we're seeing right now is emotional response with 12 new veterinary schools starting. I actually have a fear with 12 new veterinary schools starting, we're going to flood the market with veterinarians. They're still not going to go back to small town America. We're still going to have that problem. But what's going to happen, they're going to be graduate with $200,000 worth of educational debt. But right now, when one of our kids graduates from veterinary school, on average, they have 3 or 4 job offers, and they pick the one that suits them best. You increase class sizes of all the current veterinary schools, which schools are doing, and add 12 new schools. Now what's going to happen is each practitioner is going to have 3 or 4 applicants they get to pick from, and they're going to pick the one they want best. We're going to have veterinarians that are either unemployed or grossly underpaid. And it's not going to solve at least the geographic component of the veterinary shortage. It might get more people into spay neuter if salaries go down, but I actually think veterinary salaries are going to decrease when those 12 new schools start graduating students.
Where do you think the corporatization of vet clinics comes into this? Because more being swallowed up.
Yeah. Oh, and it's, oh boy, you just you just threw one out there. I haven't read the details of this law that just passed in the November election in Colorado, creating this, they call it a mid-level, and there's lots of people in the profession are supporting mid-level practitioner, and lots of people are still opposed, and we don't know where that's going to shake out. But if I understand this, what just happened in Colorado correctly, those people aren't even as qualified as veterinary technicians. Their training is less than the training of a veterinary technician, and yet this Colorado thing is going to allow them to do surgery and make diagnoses. I think the corporate practices are going to gobble them up like candy. They're going to want those people. Why? Because they can get them for much less money. And I don't think they're going to solve anything. I think you're going to, if that trend carries on, why is anybody going to invest 8 years of college and $200,000 worth of educational debt to become a veterinarian when they can do some of the same things with a program that's 3 semesters long? And in my opinion, it's scary. Now, at one point, I know the Veterinary Shortage Task Force was seriously looking at this mid-level practitioner thing, and that may very well be part of the solution, but this Colorado thing is not.
Well, and you think about mid-level practitioner, there's so much in the details of it, right, Dr. Bushby?
Right.
How much training do they get?
Right.
Who is training them? And then what are they going to now be qualified to do?
Right.
So I think the devil's in the details of what that would be. And I don't think we've gotten to having those robust conversations yet.
We've not. And AVMA has been fighting it all along. I used to, when I was on the circuit, pre-COVID, when I was on the circuit, and now still to our students, I have this lecture on high volume spay neuter, access to care, and the challenge to the veterinary profession. And I talk about what happened when high volume spay neuter clinics were introduced and how the veterinary profession pushed back, and now ultimately has accepted it, and it's been a really good thing. And I talk about this whole issue of access to care, where now the estimates are 30 to 40 million pets a year living in homes that can't afford even basic veterinary care. Mm-hmm. And I talk about this article that was published in the June 1991 Veterinary Economics Journal, entitled "How to Keep a Humane Society Clinic Out of Your Community." And the author was a guy by the name of Gordon Robinson, who was chief of surgery and then ultimately the director of Henry Bergh Memorial Hospital of the ASPCA. And this was his argument, that in 1990, in the 70s, when I was at the ASPCA, when I was at Henry Bergh in the 70s, they started a low-cost spay-neuter program. We would spay and neuter anything for $25. I have no idea how many fat old St. Bernards I spayed for $25 in that program. But by the 90s, that program was performing 4,000 low-cost spay-neuter surgeries a year. And I won't have the figures exact. It's been a while, but Gordon says 1990 there were 175 practices in New York City. He said if each practice did only one low-cost or free spay-neuter one a week, collectively they would do almost 8,000 low-cost or free spay-neuters, double what the ASPCA's program was doing. So his argument was, if the veterinary profession would step up and do their share, we wouldn't have a need for all these high-volume spay-neuter clinics. Well, of course, the veterinary profession didn't step up, and now there's high-volume spay-neuter clinics all over the country, all right? And I would end the presentation with the very existence of high-volume spay-neuter clinics, which were opposed broadly by practicing veterinarians in the 90s. Their very existence was a collective decision by the veterinary profession to not act on a problem. And now we have the exact same situation. We have the veterinary profession who is not been able to figure out how to deal with access to care. So I say, if we as a profession don't figure it out, someone else will. Well, the
Mhm.
voters of Colorado figured something out. Most of us fear it. Most of us think it's wrong, but we didn't do anything as a profession to interfere in the problem. Yep, we
And I
didn't.
will give a shout out to our private practice vets in Indiana. We've got a robust list of private practitioners that do low cost spay neuters for us, in addition to the high quality, high volume clinics.
See, they
But
are. They're saying, okay, we'll do our part.
mhm,
That's what we
yeah, there
need.
still aren't enough of them, but we do have
Yeah,
a lot of good.
that's what
We
we
have a
need.
lot of great vets, and we see that vets get criticized a lot for not solving the problem. But Dr. Bushby, as you mentioned, they graduate, they've got a lot of debt.
Oh, yeah.
The corporatization that Ray brought up of vet practices, and private equity firms are purchasing them,
Right.
where they don't have the control to make those decisions.
I think I'm going to play a little bit of a devil's advocate here just to shake things up
Cool.
because I'm in Colorado, okay? And while this legislation has been pushed and there was, pros and cons on both sides, supporters and those against it, I barely heard from vets what their opinion was on this. I heard much, much more from veterinary technicians who worried about their jobs than I did from vets, like significantly more. And I don't think that that this like mid-level position is an overreaction. I think it's a natural reaction to by the people who are not in who as a general voter. I mean, you might be in animal welfare, but for the most part, most people aren't. And people the vast majority of people have dogs and cats and they're upset and they're mad about how much vet care costs. They're mad that you go into certain clinics and they want to charge $1,000 for a dog spay. I
Oh,
get it. I understand. And so I had no doubt that this would pass because from not knowing anything about animal welfare, how a clinic works, any of that, it sounds very, very logical to the average person
oh, absolutely.
to bring this in.
I agree with you. Absolutely. It sounds, when people say my dog was hit by a car, the closest veterinary clinic I can get to is 70 miles away. They're going to want something closer.
Mhm.
They're going to want something cheaper. So it's perfectly logical that they would vote for that would pass. We as a profession as a whole have created a void. Someone's going to fill that void. And I don't blame anybody that tries to fill that void.
What's your take on that, Sherry?
Well, I think you guys have hit the nail on the head. We've seen emergency situations where people are diverted. So there was a case in Indianapolis that hit the news, and it was a young couple trying to get their dog to an emergency clinic, and they were told to go ahead and euthanize the dog because the clinic was not going to be able to see the dog in a timely fashion. So luckily, they were able to find a spot in Cincinnati and drove a couple hours, and their dog lived. So the animal welfare side is one part of the terrifying situation. Being a pet owner and not knowing what's going to happen when you have an emergency situation is also quite terrifying and very expensive. And
So was
in the vet shortage, it's not just small animals; it's big ag. They're looking to keep vets in their industry, academia. They've got posted jobs that are going empty. And do you have that too, Dr. Bushby?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I see listings for that all the time. Everybody needs a vet. Everybody wants a high quality, high volume spay neuter services, and it's hard to find them. So I wonder, like, is it actually that we have a vet shortage, or is it more so that our vets are disproportionately placed and more concentrated on these in big cities that are better funded with corporations who are paying them better salaries and better hours?
Well, I think that's absolutely part of it. That's
It,
part of it.
Ohio did a study of where their vet deserts are by county, and then they asked the Ohio State University, where are your vet students from this year? Where are your incoming freshmen? And only one was from a vet desert. But again, as we talked about earlier, that does not give that student the ability to start practice back in his or her hometown.
It snowballs. I'm on the admissions committee at Mississippi State. We're in the process right now, fall of the year, we're reviewing applications. We want to look at what animal experience they've had, what veterinary experience they've had, on and on and on and on and on. The number of applicants that we get that say, there's no veterinarian in my town. Closest veterinarian is 40 miles away. I would have liked to have gone in and got a part-time job or shadow at that practice, but I couldn't do it 40 miles away. So it's self-perpetuating. If you live in a desert, you don't get the veterinary experience that the person living in the suburbs that has 2 specialty practices, a high volume clinic, and a half a dozen veterinary practices within a 15-mile radius. You don't get the veterinary experience. So either you don't ever apply, or you don't get in anyway because you've not had the experiences to compete with the other guy. It's self-defeating.
And we see that there are a lot of stakeholders besides just who we've talked about so far. So cities, towns, and counties, they're going to pay more for these overcrowded shelters. They're going to need to hire more animal control officers. Of course, the shelter staff themselves and the ACOs, that is tough work. As you know, Rae, you're an ACO. That's tough work on a good day. And in this bad post-pandemic situation with the vet shortage, it's incredibly difficult. And then you think about health departments that are in charge of disease outbreaks. The animal welfare community has been doing a lot of that work quietly and behind the scenes, because when spay neuter takes place, rabies vaccinations are generally given.
Right. So that leads right back to Rae's question a while ago related to comparing the cost of spaying and neutering an animal to the cost of maintaining that animal in a shelter for a period of time and getting it ultimately either adopted or transported, or sadly these days, euthanized. Spay neuter is much less expensive, or could be much less expensive. If they're depending upon the one practitioner who charges $600 for a spay, okay, it's not less expensive. But if they're thinking the concept of a high quality, high volume spay neuter clinic, or having their own veterinarian do the spay neuters, spaying and neutering an animal is so much less expensive than keeping it in the shelter.
So when we started the vet shortage task force at the United Spay Alliance, we had no idea how difficult it would be to increase the number of graduating veterinarians going into spay neuter. So we had to look at plan B. So how do we engage the vets that we do have? So we're looking at some different things. One, as you mentioned, I think earlier, Rae, on the podcast, is wet labs. So that's training vets in high quality, high volume spay neuter. Dr. Bushby can tell us, vets come out of school with very little spay neuter surgical experience. And even vets that have been around for a while don't have the expertise in the high quality, high volume spay neuter. So increasing their capacity is really key to getting more people involved. And then reciprocity. So on the call on the vet shortage task force is Dr. Whedon out of Florida. And he said, he's retired. He moved from the University of Illinois. He retired. He moved to Florida to play golf. All he does is fix cats. He's never played a round of golf. And we said, Dr. Whedon, how do we find more of you? Where are these retired vets that are bored, that want to keep up their skill set? And so he trotted over to Tallahassee and introduced a bill. And it ended up passing, and it allows reciprocity. And I'll let Dr. Bushby explain that whole thing. But it allows vets to come into Florida to voluntarily sterilize cats and dogs, which is a great training place for veterinarians. People like to go to Florida, and it just opens the door to get people doing high quality, high volume spay neuter, and maybe getting paid later on if they want to get their license in Florida. So reciprocity and wet labs are a couple of the things that we're working on.
Yeah, and it's true. We, and our program is so focused on giving students spay neuter experience. But we did a project back in the summer where we got 4 veterinarians, practicing veterinarians, spent a week in our program. and we functioned with them just like we do with our students. One of those veterinarians had been out of vet school, graduated vet school 2021, graduated veterinary school without ever having done a spay, without ever having done it, was literally afraid of surgery. And by the end of the week, we spent a week with 4 different veterinarians. The other 3 were more recent graduates, but it's not uncommon at all to graduate veterinary school having done a half a spay or 1 spay. And to me, that's insane.
That blows my mind.
Literally
I
is
can't believe
insane.
that.
Yeah. And yet part of it, a lot of it's the vet school's fault. Probably, see, I'm retired and I still work part-time, but I might be fired after this. Our veterinary teaching hospitals have become tertiary care centers. And I can fully understand why when you've got a dog on the surgery table getting a total hip replacement, and you've got a board certified surgeon and a surgical resident, I can totally understand why the veterinary student isn't taking the scalpel and doing the surgery. Okay, I can totally understand that. But when that's virtually the entire caseload of surgery is the complex referral level cases that hit the teaching hospitals, kids graduate veterinary school with very, very little surgical experience. And so they have no confidence, they have no competence, and we wonder why we can't find surgeons in our spay neuter clinics anymore. Because they're not, in most veterinary schools, they're not trained to do it.
Why don't colleges put on high volume, high quality spay neuter to train their students then for the community or for the shelter? Hey, you've got all these shelter animals. We'll take them. We'll practice on them. Let's do them here.
I'm going to brag on my own school, but there are schools that do that. We did a survey of our students that graduated in May of this year, 2024. On average, they had done 104 surgeries at the time of graduation, on average. Now, some had only done 30 or 40, and many had been in the hundreds. They averaged 104. How does that happen? Well, we have a high volume spay neuter clinic. We have a required rotation where senior students spend 2 weeks in that shelter spay neuter rotation, and that's all they do for 2 weeks. And then we have elective courses which give them more experience if they want it. So it's possible. Bob Whedon did some of that at Illinois. It takes a faculty member willing to fight for it and push it. And there's not many out there that are doing that.
Well, it's kind of sad, actually, to think about because it's so necessary. I mean, you could argue, in theory, right? I know we're jumping around here and there, but you could argue, in theory, that for those vets who do not like this mid-level practitioner who's going to be doing spay neuters are going to have the same amount of experience of doing spay neuter as a DVM coming out of college, potentially having also never done a spay neuter.
Thank you for saying that, Ray. I didn't want to say it.
And I shouldn't say what I'm about to say.
I'm getting you all kinds of trouble here.
If those people could rotate through our program in a week, those mid-level people could rotate through our program in a week, they would graduate that mid-level program with significantly more surgical experience than most of the veterinarians from most of the other veterinary schools. There's no doubt in my mind.
So the United Spay Alliance is working to fill that weird little void with wet labs, and so far we've held 10 wet labs in 5 states. So right off the top of my head, I'm thinking Maine, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Georgia, and Florida. And expanding, I think there's one planned for Idaho in early 2025. Indiana, we're working to have one here. So they're working to have wet labs to get more vets, the clinicals that they thought they would get in vet school, providing that. And a lot of vets were finding out they want to do clinicals. They want to do surgery. They want to do community service.
Yeah, if they're not afraid of it.
Yeah, and why wouldn't you be afraid of it if you don't have
If
experience? I'd
you've
be
never done it,
terrified.
but this is where it gets really complicated, and maybe things are changing. But I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago, I was asked to do a pediatric wet lab at a conference in Texas. Right, it was going to be 2 days where veterinarians would come into that practice and would do spay and neuter of puppies and kittens. I had to get a temporary license to practice veterinary medicine in the state of Texas for a 2 day workshop. It cost, when it was all said and done, it cost $800 and 5 months to get that license. No one could participate in that workshop if they didn't have a license to practice in veterinary medicine in the state of Texas, or get a temporary license, go through the same $800 thing. So even you would think the practice acts would want to, the licensing boards would want to help solve this problem. But in that particular example, they were the enemy of solving that problem.
And this gets back to reciprocity that we talked about
Right,
earlier. And that's why
right.
USA is having individual state training sessions so that vets within those states can train veterinarians within those states.
I
Otherwise,
mean,
there's so much red tape, time, and money involved. It's just
Right.
a nightmare.
we really are shooting ourselves in the foot and self-perpetuating this, like you had mentioned, Dr. Bushby, the
That's
problem.
right.
I
Yeah,
mean, we are making our own problem, but we are also our own solution. And
we
so that's
we
why
we
uh,
can be.
we can be our own solution. And Cheri, that's why I love, the work that United Spay Alliance does in this aspect, because you're not constant, because it's not just there. You're not just in one state, you are in every state. You have a lead in every state helping.
Almost every state these days.
So helping, well, actually, I'll let you talk. What do those leads do? What is their role
So,
for expanding, educating?
So United Spay Alliance, when you go on their website, unitedspayalliance.org, there's a map of the United States, and the green states are all verified. They have a state lead. So if you call me, I'm in Indiana, you're looking for resources in Michigan, I'm going to point you to that page, and then Michigan can help the Michiganders find low-cost spay neuter. We also have a quarterly state leads meeting, state leaders. So we're sharing the information we learn with all of our states so that we're not recreating the wheel. We're offering wet labs to states. Anything that we have in our wheelhouse, anything that we can provide, we're providing it to all the states. And it's a brain trust of people that are dedicated to controlling animal overpopulation. So it's just a really, really great team.
If you're wondering why I've been turning around looking at the bookcase, I've been looking for a particular book, and I haven't. I know I've got it, but I don't see it off the just like that. One of my favorite books is called Discovering the Future: The Business of Paradigms, and it's written by a guy by the name of Joel Arthur Barker. I don't know, Cheri, if we've talked about this book before or whatever. I see you smiling, or maybe you know the book. But one of the he says paradigms. We all function in paradigms, and so we have the veterinary medicine education paradigm and the veterinary licensing paradigm or whatever, and it's kind of the written or unwritten rules of how we function within that system. And anybody who challenges that a particular paradigm is viewed as a threat. There's resistance to it. And one of the main themes of his book is you cannot turn to the people inside the paradigm who control the paradigm to fix the problems that are created by that paradigm. Someone else has to push and shove. That's what the voters in Colorado did 2 weeks ago. And that's what United Spay Alliance is doing. They are outside of the licensing paradigm, but they're trying to convince the licensing organizations that if you did this, it could help solve this problem, and it's a problem you're not currently solving. If you've never read that book, find it. You can read it in an hour, but it's fascinating. The guy has a brilliant mind, and he basically, his philosophy can apply literally to anything in life, where we all function by these funny rules that are either written or unwritten, but we believe in them. We trust them. We've made our careers in them. We made our living in this paradigm, and someone's threatening the paradigm.
And it takes us back to the top of this podcast when you mentioned pediatric spay neuter as revolutionary.
Yeah.
And it absolutely is. And I had a presentation last week. We talked about trap, neuter, vaccinate, return programs and how revolutionary those are to animal shelters, to keeping cats in homes where, in their outdoor environments where they're cared for. And so we're looking for these new, innovative, replicable models. And that's the type of information we share with state leaders at United Spay Alliance. So I love how you just kind of brought that inadvertently around, Dr. Bushby.
Well, I know, honestly, I feel like we could probably talk about this forever because it's so involved. There's so many facets to this, but we don't have forever. So, Cheri and Dr. Bushby, before we wrap up, is there anything that I missed? Anything you want to cover? Do you want to leave an ending message? Anything like that?
One of the biggest threats that we are currently facing, especially in shelters, is a series of articles published out of the veterinary school at University of California, Davis, by a team led by Benjamin Hart, who has been, and the articles were published in open access journals, meaning it's not just, it's only veterinarians that get the AVMA journal, but when something's published in an open access journal, you hit the keyboard and you do a Google search and bam. So you're saying, when should I get my dog spayed and neutered? And all of a sudden you've got these articles which say don't do it, and especially large breed dogs until they're fully grown. The large breed dog, that's usually like 18 months or so. And so for female dogs, she's already had 3 litters of puppies. And there's so many flaws in those articles. The research shouldn't even be called research, but I'm biased. And the research that's not been done. So he points out, and some of it's legit, that there are certain orthopedic risks and some health risks as a dog gets older, that they see a difference between dogs that were spayed before 2 years of age or whatever and intact dogs. All right. So yes, there are some things. He doesn't get into what are the health risks if they remain intact their entire life. And he also doesn't get into, and nobody has done this, and it really needs to be done. Nobody has looked at what is the difficulty and the complication rate when you compare spaying a 5-pound, 8-week-old puppy versus a 50-pound, 2-year-old obese adult dog. No one has looked at what's the rate of hemorrhage, what's the rate of dropped pedicles, what's the fatality rate. No one has done that research. And so we have this biased series of articles which have a segment of veterinarians and certainly a segment of the public saying, no, you can't spay my dog until it's 2 years old.
And it's especially problematic because these are large dogs. And that's the one type of dog. We don't need any dogs, but that's the one type we certainly don't need. They're so hard to get adopted. They eat a lot. They go to the restroom. They knock things over with their tail. They pull you down. They're great, but you've got to have the right owners.
Yeah. They're the hardest to get adopted out of the shelters. They're the most difficult and most expensive ones to spay and neuter.
And we've seen in Indiana where the rates have gone through the roof for large dogs, and some vets are just turning large dogs away.
There's a lot of vets that will not do a large dog. It's not financially, it's not worth it. Mm-hmm. And I understand the vet saying, I can't spend, I can spay a 5-pound puppy in 12 minutes, and it's going to take me 45 minutes to an hour to spay this large dog, and I can't charge 5 times as much for it, so I'm just not going to do the large dog.
And that's something that the studies aren't mentioning to pet owners, that you might not be able to afford to get your pet fixed, and you might simply just be turned away.
Well, I think that's a big part of where that collaboration and subsidizing spay neuter for I mean, for everyone, really. If it were up to me, all spay neuters would be free. They'd be covered, fine, boom, we'll get this figured out. But it doesn't work that way. But I very much support mandatory spay neuter laws. I think that we need to help people and subsidize that, because I was just talking to someone the other day who has no idea about this and thinks that everybody could take care of their own dog, doesn't need to be spay neutered, and they understand and they'll get it done after they have a litter. But it's like, from my perspective, is probably very different from what you two see, because I'm working in a different capacity in the field and trying to explain to people, you have to do this is a requirement, these are all the things that can happen, because it at least where I am, parvo is rampant. And the amount of litters I see dying from parvo just because they don't want to spay neuter is more than you would probably think. It is a lot. I don't think I have worked at another jurisdiction where it's that bad, and it happens all the time. And I mean, it's just so easily prevented by spay neuter, and you're not making that not only that female dog's life better, but you're also eliminating what if she has 20 puppies? Those 20 houses that you have to find for those dogs, assuming that they survive.
And assuming that those 20 households spay neuter their animals.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, and the people that say, well, yeah, my dog has a litter of puppies, but they're so cute, I can always give them away. And my response to that is, every puppy you give away is a puppy that just died in a shelter.
Yeah.
Because that family that just took a free puppy from you is not going to go to a shelter and adopt a puppy. So when you have a litter of 10 puppies, you're dooming 10 animals in a shelter to die. And every time you do that, 10 more die in a shelter. So I actually think what we need is mandatory and enforced leash laws, mandatory and enforced licensing for dogs and cats, with a differential licensing fee, where the licensing fee for an intact animal is significantly higher than the licensing fee for one that's been sterilized, and the revenue generated from the licensing fees of the intact animals is used to subsidize the cost of spay neuter. That, I think, is an easier thing to get done than mandatory spay neuter. But
I love that.
You're generating a revenue that can subsidize, and you're showing people that, gosh, the cost of licensing this dog over 2 or 3 years is more expensive than the cost of spaying it now. Let's get it spayed.
Let's get it spayed.
Absolutely. And I would say, that what we talked about earlier today, when to spay and neuter, fixed by 5, I think that's really important. I think it's catching on like wildfire. It's endorsed by the AVMA and a lot of other institutions. But I don't think most people know when to get their animals fixed.
Right.
And I think that's a really important educational message.
And most veterinarians are still taught in veterinary schools after 6 months of age.
And I know you mentioned...
I have not a clue.
Ray, I know you mentioned free surgeries, but we're finding in models in Indiana that most people can pay, and some only need a $15 or $20 discount off of the $100. Some have fallen on hard times and need deeper discounts. And then you always get the widower at the end of a dead-end street who gets dumped on, and that's where your free surgeries come in.
Yeah.
Everybody's got that.
I think you put that better then. I think you put that better, Cheri. Yeah, yep. I would agree. Well, I just want to say thank you to both of you for coming on and talking about this. It's really important. I like having these different perspectives about the vet shortage. I think it's important to hear from not only you, Dr. Bushby, who's been doing this for a very, very long time, from a DVM perspective, but then also from Cheri, who you've also been doing this for a very long time and has that so much exposure to different communities, what they need, what they want, how to fix it. I mean, you're not just like a let's find the problem, let's find the solution kind of person too, which I always love. So I don't have anything else, and I just want to say thank you both very, very much for coming on.
I'm being attacked.
Thank you, Rae. It's a pleasure to be here. And Dr. Bushby, who is this?
This is Shadow.
Oh, he's
Hi,
sweet.
Shadow.
Shadow is a rescue from the shelter back in December 2 years ago. It actually got down, temperatures actually got down into the single digits in Mississippi. And Shadow was owned by a person that had several of them. I'm afraid he was probably a bait dog, or going to be. And it got so cold, the guy brought him into a wood shed to keep him warm and put a gas heater in the woodshed and caught the woodshed on fire. Most of them died. Quite obviously, Shadow didn't. But his entire right side was charred, just absolutely burnt. He still has a huge area on his right side that no hair will ever grow back. But anyway, he got picked up by a rescue. He ended up at the Starkville shelter. I was on duty at the Starkville shelter, and he walked in that night just with, part of his side looking like charcoal, wagging his tail and trying to lick me in my face. And I knew he was going to be mine. And he is.
I love that story, and I love him. He's darling.
He is so cute. If everybody's watching this, you got to see the Shadow's adorable, and he's neutered too.
Oh yeah.
By the way.
Yep. All right.
All right.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure, Rae. If I get fired, I'm going to blame you.
All right. Well, I'll be happy to have those conversations with them.
We'll find a spot for you, Dr. Bushby.
Huh?
We'll find a spot for you.
All right. Good seeing you, Cheri.
Good to see you too.
And I just want to say thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in to the AWIP podcast. And just remember that spay is the way.